So you're thinking about selling your home, and suddenly you start looking around thinking, oh, I should probably update the kitchen. Maybe I should redo that bath in the basement. I know I need new flooring or new windows or who knows what else. Really? Now that you're going to do all the projects you've been putting off for the last 10 or 20 years right before you go? Because somewhere along the line, a lot of sellers started believing they need to turn their home into the latest HGTV reveal just to put it on the market. And honestly, sometimes that's a huge waste of money. Now, that doesn't mean you ignore obvious problems, because there are definitely things buyers notice and definitely repairs that do matter. But there's a big difference between preparing your home to sell and spending more than what makes sense for your area or your market. You know, if something's broken, actively leaking, unsafe, or looks heavily neglected, that's a different story. But where I see a lot of sellers get into trouble is when they start confusing preparing the home for sale with completely remodeling the house before they leave it. Because in a lot of cases, that money never fully comes back to them, especially in today's Denver metro market, because buyers are still looking at affordability, monthly payments, interest rates, and overall value. So if you spend $30,000 or $40,000 redoing spaces that were functional to begin with, you may not see the return you thought you would. And that's all because once people decide they're moving, they suddenly start seeing every little flaw of the house. That older countertop they stopped noticing years ago. The bathroom they always meant to update. The carpet that they've been living with forever that looks a bit worn. And before long, they start feeling like they need to fix all of it before they even sell. Now, buyers may notice those things, but that doesn't automatically mean you need a full renovation, because most buyers are really asking themselves this: is the home clean? Has it been maintained? Can I move in without any major immediate problems? And does the price make sense for the condition and location? That's usually the bigger conversation, not whether your bathroom looks like a luxury spa from HGTV. And this is where I see a lot of sellers start to overspend. Yeah, especially right before they list. Bathrooms are a big one. Now, I've seen sellers consider tearing apart an entire basement bathroom, trying to turn a small half bath into a full shower setup, when honestly, that money may not come back to them in the sale, especially if the rest of the neighborhood isn't supporting that level of an upgrade. You see this in a lot of neighborhoods around Littleton, even parts of Denver, where sellers start feeling like they need to fully renovate everything just to compete. But even in neighborhoods where buyers do expect certain features, you still have to look at the cost, the complexity, and the return on the project itself. For example, if turning a small half bath into a 3/4 bath means moving plumbing, reworking the layout, opening up walls, and spending tens of thousands of dollars, sometimes it makes more sense to simply price the home appropriately for what it is, instead of trying to fully renovate it right before you're leaving. The same thing happens with kitchens. Now, if a kitchen's heavily damaged or completely non-functional, that's a different story. But replacing perfectly usable cabinets or doing a full custom remodel or even putting in extremely high-end finishes right before you leave, well, that doesn't make financial sense, especially if the buyers in that price range are already planning to personalize the home anyway. Windows are another place I see sellers panic and think, oh my gosh, I need to replace every window before I can sell this house. Well, sometimes you do need to address a broken seal or a damaged window. But replacing every window in the house right before selling? Well, that can become a very expensive project very quickly. Sometimes buyers would rather negotiate around those things than pay a significantly higher price because the seller renovated everything beforehand. Today's buyers are still looking at affordability. They're calculating payments, insurance, future maintenance, and how much cash they still need after closing. So over-improving a home for the neighborhood or for the current market can sometimes work against you financially when you're planning to sell. Now, that doesn't mean you do nothing before selling. Yeah, those days are over, because there's absolutely things that help a home show better, feel better, and make buyers more comfortable moving forward. And most of them are a lot less expensive than a major remodel. Things like decluttering. And that alone can feel overwhelming for a lot of people. I actually did a separate video on decluttering, especially when you want to keep everything. And I'll link it here, because that part of the process, that can feel very emotional too. And then there's deep cleaning and depersonalizing the home a bit. Fresh paint inside can do wonders in a home, especially if the walls are heavily worn or dark or very personalized. Improving lighting also helps. And taking care of obvious maintenance issues before the buyers ever walk through the front door, because buyers notice how a home feels almost immediately when they walk in, how it smells, the temperature inside, and whether the home feels bright and comfortable. And honestly, sometimes it starts with something as simple as how easy the front door was to open. Those little things affect how buyers experience the home far more than most sellers realize, because a clean, well-maintained home usually creates a much stronger impression than an over-renovated home that still feels cluttered and neglected. That's the difference a lot of sellers are missing. Buyers don't necessarily expect perfection, especially in many Denver suburban neighborhoods. Buyers are often looking more at overall condition and livability than whether every finish is brand new. And in many cases, the simpler improvements create a much better return than spending months and thousands of dollars chasing major renovations right before you're leaving, especially if those renovations delay your timing, create stress, or force you to spend money you might need in your next move. Realistically, for a lot of women over 50, the goal isn't to turn the home into a model house. It's to make smart decisions, reduce overwhelm, and move forward without unnecessary stress or regret. So, before you start tearing apart bathrooms and replacing kitchens or spending tens of thousands of dollars on upgrades right before you move, take a step back and ask yourself a few questions first. Is this something the buyers will truly notice? Or is it something I've focused on because I've lived here for years? Is this a functional issue? Is it a safety issue? Or is it mostly cosmetic? And then, will this improvement realistically help the home sell faster or for more money? And if it does, will the return likely justify the cost, the stress, and the time involved? Because sometimes a smart pricing adjustment makes a lot more sense than months of construction right before you move. And honestly, timing's going to matter too. If you're doing a major renovation that delays your listing for months, you also have to ask yourself, what market are you going to be selling into later? Because markets shift, buyer demand shifts, interest rates shift, and sometimes waiting for that perfect remodel actually costs you more in the long run. That's why I always tell sellers, focus first on what helps the home feel clean, well-maintained, and easy for buyers to picture themselves living in, not what turns it into the next HGTV reveal. You know, most sellers don't need to completely renovate their home right before they're moving. They just need a smart strategy and a clear understanding of what actually matters to buyers in today's Denver market. And for a lot of people, the hardest part of that process is figuring out where to even begin, especially when it comes to what are we going to do with our stuff. I did a video on decluttering when you want to keep everything, and if you're preparing for a move, that's the next one I would recommend watching. I'll see you there. Hi, I'm Peggy Durstoff, a realtor with Live Denver Suburbs, powered by HomeSmart. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you on the next video.